the Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zappo. Let's talk Trump.
China, China, China. First things first, if you're avoiding Chinese people, if you're literally scared of going to Chinatown, if you're asking the question, can I get the coronavirus because they're Chinese, you might be a little bit racist because they ain't got nothing to do with that. That's just a fact. But hey, that's not what today's episode about. Today's episode is about those adorable Chinese trademarks that Trump just got approved. Is it a conflict of interest for the President of the United States to be simultaneously in a trade war with an accused currency manipulator while simultaneously applying for over or nearly 40 trademarks in the country? This has been reported out by various outlets, but the particular article that caught my eye was posted on apnews.com. And it's just straightforward business, right? It's just the President of the United States enhancing his portfolio, right? It's just business. Free market capitalism. Woohoo! It's being done out in the open, right in front of you, in public. Hey, Russia, if you're listening, maybe you could hack the rest of those emails. Boom! Emails hacked. By whom? Apparently Russian agents. Hey, China, if you're listening, maybe you can give us a lot of new trademark deals so that we can make money over there, even though we're pretending to be in a trade war with you. This is where, and I have been saying this since the beginning, right? Emoluments clause, emoluments clause, emoluments clause. Hello? Now, I don't really understand why there's so much debate, other than due process, I suppose. And what's interesting is that, crony capitalism and crony democracy are having some sort of mutant baby and getting away with it all through the use of shell organizations and, the standard sort of everybody knows the tricks, everybody knows how they do it. If Obama had done 1/15 of what Trump is doing, then I think that the GOP and the Obama haters who were active at the time would have lost their proverbial shit. But when Trump does it, he's the living motherfucking messiah who is unable to cure us of coronavirus. Doesn't make any goddamn sense. Now, you could argue that applying for patents in a foreign country shouldn't be a problem for a sitting president. And in today's climate, I bet you can go a long way peddling that kind of nonsense. But quite frankly, the quote unquote most powerful person in the world, or the office thereof, is supposed to, mind you, they often, I'm going to guess, fail, but is supposed to be held with integrity, right? With some sense of honor and duty to the rules and regulations and restrictions placed upon the office. And in theory, those individuals selected and benighted by the people, supposedly through democratic, of the people, by the people kind of means, we're supposed to trust that these individuals are savvy enough to do the right thing and, disentangle themselves from complex financial conflict of interest type situations. And generally speaking, I guess we have presumed that they have. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Maybe they've been bullshitting all along. Maybe everybody on both sides plays this kind of game, and we were just too coddled and blindfolded to catch on earlier. Who's to say, right? Without an extensive review. What we do know for a fact is that if we're arguing who's the most corrupt, then it cannot be denied that in recent memory, this particular current established presidency, this office is trying to go for the world record, right? It's obvious, like they're trying to win that contest. And so, at least it seems like. Is that me disparaging the president? I don't know. I guess it could be seen as that. But it's all relative to one's perspective, right? There are people in this country that literally are choosing to believe that Donald Trump, 3 times divorced, proven cheater, and what's that word for a guy, who does horrible things and is rude to women? There's a word for that. That would have been funny if I had said it, and I didn't, so it's not funny. But that he also is this person, and yeah, I get it. Mysterious ways and, forgiveness and presumption of innocence and all that, of course. But as I said yesterday, if he is the Messiah, why isn't he busy doing Messiah-like things? Where is the healing? Where is the feeding of the hungry? Where is the housing of the homeless? That's what Messiah does, right? Messiah rights the wrongs. This critique that I'm levying is, quite honestly, that old saying, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing everyone that he doesn't exist. I think that's in some ways true. I think that the greatest trick that politicians ever pulled was convincing the political base that they're doing anything at all for their political base, when they are categorically not. Now, no one wants to recognize that about their own political idol. At least those who are caught up in the idolatry. Ooh, that's a strong word. But I think given that almost all of politics seems to be driven by cult of personality, then we can very quickly categorize everybody as a sort of short-term idol. We find people to idolize and we give them temporary power, and then those with real power act through them. That's what I observed. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misunderstanding a few steps here or there, but that's what I see. And I see a very dangerous pattern that is larger than Trump. And that, in my humble opinion, with all the resistance fervor, has been generally sort of pushed aside as, well, right now the urgent thing is Trump, so we can't really address that. And I dare to say to anybody willing to listen that if we continue to operate that way, we're going to succeed in nothing other than switching out the puppet in the puppet show for some other puppet. Now, when I call a politician a puppet, I hope you understand that I'm speaking from an esoteric and spiritual perspective. And I'm not talking about just crass, fundamental money, greed, corruption, although that's all part of it, right? I'm talking from a larger point of view, from a metacosmic, metacognizant, metacosmological point of view. And inclusive in the statement is that all human beings are effectively puppets. We are all semi-autonomous movie cameras for the divine being. And each of us is providing the divine consciousness with a highly individuated, highly personalized adventure experience. Now that may sound silly to some people, but that's because they've really tried to drum it out of us. This idea that we are portals for divinity to experience, right? We are portals for divinity to have the experience of being us. From that perspective, we can actually discuss things beyond the abstract what-if-ism of wouldn't it be nice if things were different? And here's why. From a purely material, and here's why I think that's important. From a purely materialist standpoint, you get to a logical conclusion of, meh, not a lot I can do. They have all the money, they have all the power, they have all the guns, they have all the, unless I want to in on a bloody revolution, not much I can do. So, given those circumstances, what do most people choose? Obvious, right? But if we recontextualize, if we zoom back and understand that A, we're not alone, B, we're not as isolated as we have been led to understand or believe ourselves to be, if we zoom out and realize that not only is our individuality a much needed and much useful, very useful illusion, but it is indeed an illusion that hides another level of operation, right? And that if we can transcend that illusion, then we can engage with this other level of operation. Is that all crazy talk? Perhaps. Is it possible for you, as an individual, caught up in your individuality, to investigate these as theories and find out for yourself? Abso-fucking-lutely. And it shouldn't take you most of 30 years either. It can, if you dilly-dally and keep pushing it off and keep dismissing it as hocus-pocus, new age woo-woo nonsense, which is, of course, precisely what the system encourages us to do. The system, right? The system of oppression, the system which can stand for, that's my label for insert your favorite bad guy scenario here. Whatever you want to call them, whatever name you think they go by, whether you think they're 6'2" lizard people from another planet, or you think they're just rich, ugly human beings living in rich, ugly human being dwellings, or whatever variation of conspiracy theory in between you might prefer. Those details, I think, while fascinating, are slightly less important than the simple fact that reality is more complex than we give ourselves credit for, that we give ourselves permission to understand, and that alone is a game changer. Politics, as we know it, works contingent on this Judeo-Christian, generalized, nonsensical, materialist thinking. And that we are generally somehow pseudo-Judeo-Christian in our morality, right? Or our suggested morality, our proposed morality, but that we don't really understand any of the real esoteric spiritual teachings from either of those two traditions. We just know that they are good and other people's ideas are bad. Well, that's a ridiculous comfort zone to establish, isn't it? I think so. And as we barrel towards this historic electoral moment in history, I humbly suggest to you, dear friends, I was going to say consistently, in that I think I've been consistent with this suggestion for quite some time. I humbly suggest to you that if we really want to solve the problems that we confront in politics, then we need to look beyond politics. And as the previous segment was cleverly titled, and then I didn't spend hardly any time talking about, once we hit that concern, once we hit that level of things, and we start thinking about, like, how do we achieve those goals that are beyond standard everyday politics? There's so much more to do. There's so much more to be concerned about than just participating in the cycle. The election cycle is fascinating. It's entertaining. And yes, of course, presidential politics has real life impact on real life people. I'm not pretending otherwise. What I'm saying is that it's designed, the game is designed, I think, based on 20 some odd, 30, almost 30 years of observing, it's designed to keep us operating within a sort of limited framework. And that framework deters us from exploring opportunities that exist beyond the framework. It's a limiting framework. It keeps us busy on a treadmill, fighting with each other, arguing with each other about policy, instead of just feeding those who are hungry. I mean, the very fact that feeding hungry human beings is now a controversial, problematic, and in some jurisdictions, illegal thing. I mean, that's proof enough, right? That things are upside down and backwards, and generally speaking, we're doing it wrong. I think that might very well be the very first thing a theoretical Jesus, who theoretically returns embodied as a singular, like if Jesus literally meant he would return, which I don't think is the correct interpretation, right? We've talked about that before on the show. Somewhere in some past episode, I pontificate about that. But if it were to be the case that he literally meant this body is going to come back, so you recognize it, as it has been memeified already, I don't think that the vast majority of people who proclaim themselves to be believers and followers of Christ would recognize Yeshua Christos if that body literally rematerialized today and started speaking to us in Sumerian about the virtues of being a vegetarian entheogenic mystic. Because that's what that motherfucker was doing back in the day. No offense. He was not telling you to give your money to a giant oligarchic, war profiteering, child rapey church, and he was not telling you to believe in left versus right echo chamber ideology of us versus themist pointless political proceedings, right? Like, what would Jesus do today? He would not participate in left-right identity politics, I don't think. I think maybe, just maybe, like he whipped and, like literally whipped at and kicked out the bankers from the temple, I think he might be engaged in some of that kind of radical anti-establishment action today. I mean, the great irony of the Sanders candidacy is that so many Americans are offended by his ideological, like, word cloud of labels, and yet that word cloud of labels technically applies directly to Jesus Christ. I mean, hello? You've all seen the memes, right? If you haven't, you should. Like, there's a couple of variations on it, but basically, like, wait till America realizes that they already follow and believe in a Jewish, socialist, etc., etc., etc. And here we are, right? Billionaires fighting fake billionaires, real billionaires fighting fake billionaires, and failing at it. I think that was one of the most adorable things that happened in the last, 4 days, is that everyone's giving Bloomberg, very friendly high school, junior high level, shit for having spent however hundreds of millions of dollars just to prove that you can't buy an election if you aren't Brad Pitt sexy hot. $61.8 billion is not enough to make you charismatic, right? Like, you can be rich AF and the people will still kind of go, meh. But here's the thing. For all the critique and all the fanfare about having proved that despite Trump and Trumpism and Trumptopia happening, our quote-unquote democracy is still strong enough to stand up to a $1 billion attempt to buy it by a person like Bloomberg, let's be really honest. If fucking Fight Club level Brad Pitt had been the body, right? If Brad Pitt from Fight Club was Bloomberg, I think he might be doing slightly better right now. Don't you think? I could be wrong. But we always seem to ultimately vote for, the person that's charismatic / good looking / popular. Now, there's plenty of reasons to be like, Joe Biden is not good looking. But when you adjust for age and haggard, less like level of being haggard and ruined by old age, you got to admit that of the three old rich white guys, Joe is sort of the middle ground of schmexy enough. He was good looking enough for everybody. I have physically heard women say that he is the sexy one. Now, that's weird and gross, and I'm not throwing that out there just to make fun of any one person or any one female or any group of females, but there's literally something to it. There's something about that adjusted for old age is still a going concern that's actually important to people. We vote for charisma, right? Bloomberg didn't go anywhere despite his almost $300 million that he burned through in advertising, in large part because he was his most charismatic at his farewell speech. What the fuck was up with that, right? Like, every other public appearance during this race was a masterclass in awkward how to fuck it up while being rich and powerful. Here's a rich and powerful guy who should have the means and resources to be an exceptional public speaker, and who frames himself as a really great leader, right? Someone who's gone out of their way to be the mayor of New York 3 terms in a row, something we frown upon here in America, and yet couldn't string 5 words together eloquently enough to survive a standard, everyone yelling at each other, Democratic debate as part of the primaries. He was another person at his farewell speech. And not to sound like I'm just towing the party line, but like everybody on TV was like, where was this Bloomberg? Where was this guy in the middle of the process? I'll go a step further. It's almost as if he were just in the race to throw it, to throw a wrench, to throw around money, to throw in the very idea, the very challenging idea of a blue Trump, a DNC Trump, right? And make us contend with it. And then proceed to prove that money is still money. And that, all right, it might not help you if you aren't the most electable, but it will help whoever, I mean, it still worked, right? He definitely proved a point. The next billionaire that has enough billions to spend more than what he just spent. You know, you don't have to have $64 billion in order to spend $600 million, right? Like someone with just $30 billion can do that, no sweat. And that would be twice as much as what Bloomberg just spent. So now imagine that it's someone younger, someone rich enough, someone like sexy enough. And then what? Do we just all in on oligarchy because it's Brad Pitt? Or, who's another sexy guy that would be, probably rich enough? Antonio Banderas. Although I don't think he's voting eligible or running for office eligible. But someone like that, right? What's the American Banderas? I was just looking at some movie from the 90s with him in it where he was just a terrible, terrible actor. But he was so sexy, like it didn't matter, right? It was, oh, look at him. He's so cute. He was Batman for a hot minute. Now he has a tequila. And he's up there as like Brad Pitt level. George Clooney, right? If George motherfucking Clooney Imagine a Clooney pit ticket. And they were like, we're billionaires, we're going to self-fund. And we only have $10 billion each, but together we can spend $600 million, no sweat. That's going to go. We're just going to dive into like celebrity oligarchy, right? That sounds like, it seems like that's what they've been pushing politics towards since Ronald Reagan, a movie actor, was elected into office. I don't even think he was the first one, right? Like, was Ronald Reagan the first movie actor to become a politician? He was a movie and television actor, right? And that to me just stank of ridiculous back in the day. And now I'm starting to see, like, make things that make you go, emoji multiple times, you know, like the wizened stroking chin face. Because, like, whoa, it's almost like they're doing it on purpose. Huh? Well, anyways. So, right, interesting times. It's a thrilling time to be alive. So, I always try to come back to this. If we're going to solve the problems, we need to think beyond the tools that we used to create them. That's just problem solving 101. And I can't even take credit for that idea, right? Like, I'm finding my words for it, but I weren't the first to come up with that idea. I wasn't the first to maybe suggest that, you know, like, it's been out there. And quite frankly, that's going to take a lot of work. Because our everyday, average, ordinary Joe Schmo on the street, you, me, everybody, we were inundated. But as I like to remind those who might be, for whatever reason, visiting my Insight Timer app profile, peace is possible. The greatest trick they ever pulled on us, whoever they are, is to convince us that it's not. To convince us that the absence of peace is in fact the default in nature. That's a load of hogwash. Peace is possible. All-inclusive, species-wide, pineal gland activating, third eye opening, transcendent enlightenment is possible. Transformative spiritual evolution is our birthright. Never let the system tell you otherwise. And they do. That's all they do. That's what they're about. That's the core of all cultural conditioning, is getting us to neglect that birthright. Despite the fact that humanity has been enslaved by the system, the perpetual war profiteers, for centuries, we can empower ourselves and each other with direct action. Meditation practice as methodology of protest. That is our calling. That is our generation's rally cry. And as we've got all these different identity labels keeping us distracted, and we got the whole boomers versus millennial war going on, and I've been boomered. And I was just like, well, fuck you, millennial, because first of all, I'm not old enough to be a boomer, and second of all, fuck labels. Do you not see the us versus them-ism inherent in that? As soon as you divide yourselves up into you versus me versus them, we're all separate groups that disagree with each other. We're doing their work for them. We need to do the opposite of that, right? We need to unify. And we need to literally organize. That's the thing that they rely on the most, that we will not organize and self-radicalize for healing, transformative peace. And as I've pointed out before, and if you haven't heard it yet, tune in because it's just a couple segments behind this one. The system wants you to choose violence. So it is the moral imperative of the day to choose otherwise. If we choose violence, they win. If we choose violence, we become them. And as I believe it was Martin Luther King that pointed out, violence and nonviolence, it's deeper than just like throwing stones and shooting people. To truly heal, to truly transform, we need to dig deep into that place of mental and emotional violence. And that isn't easy, right? That requires actual work. And that's what they distract us from. Distract, divide, disenfranchise. Don't fall for it, folks. Don't let the system tell you that you are not worthy. Because we must recognize that we are all one. If any of us are worthy, all of us are worthy. If any of us is so flawed as to be unworthy, then none of us are worthy. And that's the only place I can identify that the universe actually might be absolutist, or that it might behoove us to think in absolute terms. I could be wrong about that, but I humbly invite you to consider it. And having rambled thus far, I'm going to tie it off here like a hastily tied tourniquet around a slowly bleeding out. Why did I make that analogy gross and gory? I don't know. But we're just going to like wrap things up right here, folks. As always, forgive me for the absolutely awful amateur and sometimes really rough around the edges level that this podcast is operating at. Thank you for your patience and for your understanding that this whole project is aspirational and experimental in nature. And I hope that you are enjoying the journey as much as I am. Until next time, I have been your eccentric, yet ever humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. I humbly invite you to tune into more.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.